reading of Rynorum Awakening. Prologue. Civilized Space, Sector 13, Universal Year 9107. In the endless void of space, every life on every planet is a miracle. An old saying ran through Eve's mind as she smiled into closed eyes this morn. It was one her father enjoyed, said often by the head sensei here in Atreus, Machi la Valda. Eve knew not if the saying were true, never having left Tanli herself, but she did know there were parts here in Atreus that were no miracle. In fact, far from it. She opened her eyes, feeling the calm waves and water at their most settled state. With her in their little boat was Ven Riddle, her father, fishing the bay as they did every morning. On the row bench beside him was a blue metal mug filled with amber-hued kaffit. She let eyes glide toward blue skies, for they felt drawn there as they often were, dreaming of a life beyond. In the distance, on the shoreline, Tanli parakeets and squalor birds chirped their morning songs, and the first calls of Atrean vendors opening their carts sounded from distant markets. She could see strings of lights coming from the windows of the small port town, with Tanli's star far above them, an hour fresh from the horizon. Her heart felt still, nerves and muscle fibers loose and comforted. The sea was her safe space. She and her father always connected over its beauty. They'd both sit and feel as the morning cold turned to high noon's warmth without tarry. They'd admire the high cliffs and their sparkle under the sun, or they'd watch flocks of tropical birds come and go from the shoreline, listening to the cheeriness of their tunes and flaps of their wings. Today was no different. Eve heard her father take a quiet sip of kaffit and the clink of his metal mug as he set it beside him on the bench. She tugged with her right hand, for her fingers gripped a delicate string tied to a mechanical wheel on the outside of the boat near the water's surface. The string reached down into the sea of June, which were ever so still today. She looked down into the deep blue, sparkling as if the very rays of morning's beauty danced in the water. Ven spoke over the quiet. "Don't lean too far." Eve finished the joke, having heard it many times. "You might fall in." "Hey!" He laughed and gave her a gentle nudge with his boot, his sea-worn skin shining bright. Already he was burning, though light had only been a short while. Eve thanked On often, for she had her mother's complexion. In all her time on the sea, she never came home stung by the sun like her father. Her mother scolded them often for not using the tarp they could pull over her head to protect them, but father insisted they not use it. Rather, he always told Eve, "If today's my last day, I want nothing more than to spend the morning out here with you, under the sun and on the water." The boat jerked suddenly, and Eve looked to see her father reeling with the fury. She pulled down on her own string, beginning its mechanism of pulling in. Swiftly it was brought in full, the wheel's mechanism turned and turned, then clicked to a finish as it slapped against the side of the boat. Eve was grabbing their homemade fishing net. It was light in the hands, yet strong in frame. Her and her father said little then but the occasional glance. Their eyes said all they needed know. A lifetime of fishing as father and daughter had left them able to sense the other. Eve knew well her father would lean back hard and deep when he felt the fish was right near the surface, and there it was. Ven Riddle yanked back on his fishing rod, tipping hard, nearly sending his trusty mug off the bench. Eve leapt to her feet, dipping the net almost up to her hand's grip. There was a flurry of fighting thrusts from beneath the water. Mist was sent into her face. She struggled to rip the net out. It was a heavy weight, but already in her heart she knew what it meant. "Another gully!" she yelled over the chaos of wrangling. The words echoed all the way to the cliffs that lined the hangar bay on shore. He spoke with glee. "You think so?" "Oh, yeah. I'd not forget the weight of one of these bad boys," Eve answered as finally she lifted the net up and into the boat with the heaping metal thud. A great glob of red-pink fish laid before them. It had a thick and round body, and its tail flapped a metal drumming on the bottom of the boat. Stories say that gullyfish could swim up to 20 knots when in danger or hunting prey. Her father knelt atop it swiftly, pulling the knife out from behind the sheath at his waist. The metal drumming turned ever more frantic. Leaning o'er the fish, her father whispered an old phrase she'd heard thousands of times. "I thank you, Erin, Mother of Nature, for this gift, and I promise you, good gully, your gift shall not be wasted." Eve finished mouthing the words alongside him as he slid the knife down the top of its soft head. She closed her eyes, not able to find it in herself to watch it go. The flapping soon stopped, and Eve opened her eyes once more. Her father rose to his seat and placed the gully in a small water bucket on far side the boat. "All right. Still got your lure?" "Yeah." Eve reached down to the mechanism attached at the boat's end and dehooked her string and lure which dangled into the water. Her father laughed with a slap on the knee. Her face scrounged in annoyance. The lure was gone. His voice spoke casual wisdom. Well, the mother gives and takes, dear. 'Tis only fair the gullies too have eaten a fine breakfast today. With that, their morning of peace and fishing ended. Quickly they returned to the shoreline where Eve's mother and their sea house waited. They'd been in the Riddle family now for 4 generations, almost 175 universal years. While this wasn't the same building as the first, for many were knocked down by the sea, their job was nevertheless the same. Eve's parents, as the last 3 generations of Riddles had, brought off-planet visitors to their desired place in town. But today, as had been now for many years, there were no visitors. Most in Atreus knew those coming would seek out lands like Portolos and Stalarvos, those being Tanlee's greatest island port and the ruined city of Redford Gin, respectively. Evening fell as Eve ducked her way beneath one of the barbaric tusks that made up the fencing outside Atreus. They were from the bay whales that had used to visit the harbor every year at the tail end of Otmore, when the northern waters got too cold. They were slimy and gray, brown, furred and ancient, long and powerful. But those were stories people liked to tell, probably started thousands of years ago in the Sector 13. Eve still had never seen a bay whale poke its head above the waters for herself. But today her task was simple and one she'd done time and time again. Yet this week her father had given last week's additives once more. Go to the marshes and fetch some bait from Lady Skate. Ask for the corporal toads again. Tell her the gullies have been loving 'em. She'll want to know that. Got it. Eve had nodded. Her father had ruffled her hair, turned around and sent her out the door away from their sea house. We'll be fishing again by light tomorrow. Her feet had crackled over the smooth stones of the path away from their home. Back before dark, all right. He'd finished, and she'd turn and given one final roll of the eyes. As she'd walked, the red ash scent of always stung her nose, and she knew the culprit yet could do naught about it, for the shoreline of Atreus has long been a dead and foul sort of place, as much of the city was becoming. What was once a green and wondrous land perched between the strategic cliffs of Carn and the Bay of June was turning sludge and slout-like. Pollution poured out from the satrium cache deeper in Atreus, and with each year Eve and her father needed stray farther into the sea to fish as conditions worsened. In the city it were far less visible a thing per se, more so in the folks' hearts, for the street and homes out near the cliffs of Carn were rancid, filled with the worst of folk, those who robbed, killed, and raped. Eve's mother never bade her go that far west in Atreus, those neighborhoods by the cliffs, and she didn't intend to. 20 minutes earlier, Eve had left their small sea house, the docks, as known throughout the city. It was late in the evening as she walked past the guild school of Atul Hall and the Emanastery of the Sense on planet Tanlee. She were not far from the bay, so its wretched sea scent still perpetrated her nose. Off to her right, the fence around the nearby marshes began to form. She took one step, then another down the northern Iltep road, eyeing a strange pair hobbling eastward along the marsh edge. They looked drunken, and the mug of beer sloshing in one's hand and the great stain on the other's shirt, likely of some cheap port wine, showed a night well spent. They crashed into each other in their wobbling, and the man holding the beer tripped over himself. His drink and his body toppled into the husk fence of the marsh. The men broke into a fit of arguing as Eve turned left along the same street, away from their blabbering. She heard the distant creaking of a handheld lantern from one street over, barely audible for the ears. She arrived now in front of a small house. Its roof leaned to the left as if it were exhausted of holding its own weight. From inside, warm light and laughter spilled softly out, and a thin white cloth covered the exposed window. She crouched to her knees, touching now the muddy streets at Atreus' edge. She peeked her head inside, and ignored the need to welt on their wood-ragged door. "Evening, Stillies. Is Milo in?" A sharp flinch of Darla Stills came from the interruption, and her jolly melodic voice soon after. "Oh my, Eve Riddle. I dare say you mustn't sneak up on me like that. I'm much too old for these kinds of jokes. They're going to give me a heart attack one of these days, and I'll make sure they know it was your fault." Eve laughed to herself as the wood-ragged door scratched open, pressing through the slanted angle of their stone roof. After so many years, the corner of the door had filed down smooth. Where once it had been a great effort to pry their entrance, now it took barely more than a shoulder. Milo's mum, Darla, poked her head around the door, candlelight shining orange on her face from the window at which Eve had just spoken. "You just missed him, dear. He said he was leaving for your place. Why don't you come in for some dinner? He's bound to return." Eve rose to her feet from that crouch near the window of the Stills' home. Alright, welcome to the 10-minute video of reading Rynorum, Awakening, the sci-fi book I wrote, and I'm still kind of editing. This is the first 10-minute part on YouTube, the longer videos. When the chapters are done, I'm going to put them as like a whole thing on YouTube and do the full parts. So these are kind of just checkpoint videos. But yeah, follow along for more on any page. I post everywhere.